Welcome to the Unity BootCamp lesson on an overview of authentication. In this lesson, we'll be doing an overview on how brainCloud authentication works. There are a few key concepts we need to go over: profiles and identities, and how they work together. The profile is essentially the user's account, and it is used to store all the game or app's data about the user, including their state, user stats, entities, achievements, currency balances, etc. A profile is local to a game or an app. Profiles are not shared across games in brainCloud. An identity is used by the brainCloud server to locate the user's profile. During authentication, if a profile cannot be found for the supplied identity, then a new profile is automatically created on the server. When a user's profile is created for the first time, a unique profile ID is generated by the server. This profile ID will be returned on every successful authentication request. There are two forms of brainCloud identities: anonymous and authenticated. We'll cover anonymous identities first. An anonymous identity is convenient for the user, as there is no need for a login screen of any kind. Anonymous authentication works by having the brainCloud client generate a global unique identifier, or a GUID, to represent the anonymous ID. The user does not actually see the anonymous ID. Think of the anonymous ID as a device ID that doesn't actually identify anything about the device. The brainCloud wrapper will save the anonymous ID to the user's device as soon as it's generated on the game or app's first authentication request. Then, on a successful authentication response, the brainCloud wrapper will save the user's profile ID to the user's device as well. A quick note about the brainCloud wrapper: it was written several years ago to simplify the authentication process. It is recommended to use the brainCloud wrapper by default in your game or app. Being a user with only an anonymous identity has three key disadvantages compared to authenticated identities. For one, the user cannot access their profile from multiple devices. Second, if the user's device is lost or wiped, then their account is no longer accessible, since the anonymous ID linked to the profile was saved to the device. Finally, an anonymous user will have a difficult time participating in brainCloud social features because they are anonymous. That brings us to authenticated identities. brainCloud supports several different types of authenticated identities, including, but not limited to, email and password, user ID and password, also known as universal authentication, Facebook, Steam, Apple Game Center, Google Play services. There are several more, but you get the idea. In fact, if there is a service we don't support, it can be implemented with external authentication. External authentication allows you to add custom authentication to your game or app via scripting. It's important to note that even if your game or app implements an authenticated identity as the main form of authentication, an anonymous ID will still be generated by the brainCloud client for each user's device. That's because in order to authenticate with the brainCloud server, the anonymous ID must be sent along with the authenticated credentials. In your game or app, you will probably want to allow the users to authenticate anonymously on their first playthrough. Given the fact that creating an authenticated account can be bothersome to some users, and it will cause a portion of your user base to abandon the game or app before they even start, brainCloud allows the game or app to add additional identities to the profile after the profile has been created. Your game or app could then give the users the option of creating an authenticated identity by outlining its benefits. To help make authentication easier, we have developed a new authentication example Unity app that demonstrates the authentication process. Once in Unity, click the brainCloud menu item, then click Settings. We are already logged into our brainCloud account. We're going to create a new brainCloud app to use with the authentication example app. From the app's drop-down list, select Create New App. Give the app a name, then click Create App. Enable login, and then close the window. Run the app. Select the anonymous authentication type from the drop-down list. Click Authenticate. We've now successfully authenticated with brainCloud. The anonymous ID and profile ID are now stored on the device and can be used to re-authenticate the user with brainCloud. This example app includes select brainCloud functions. In this lesson, we'll be taking a closer look at player statistics and identities. Stop the app and then open your web browser. Navigate to the brainCloud portal. From the team dashboard, click the authentication app that we just created. Click Design, then click Cloud Data, followed by User Statistics. On the right, click the plus button to create a new user statistic. Give the statistic a name. Click Save. The user statistic has now been created and should be visible the next time we authenticate in the authentication example app. Return to Unity and run the game. From the authentication type drop-down list, select Anonymous. Notice this time the profile ID and the anonymous ID are populated with data. The app will use this data to re-authenticate with brainCloud. Click Authenticate. From the drop-down list, select Player Stats. There's the counter statistic that we just created. Click the Increment button a couple times. Close the app and rerun it. From the Authentication type drop-down list, select Anonymous, and then click Authenticate. From the drop-down list, select Player Stats. Notice the counter statistics value is at 2. That's because this is the same profile that we used just a moment ago. Stop the app and then open your web browser. Click Users, then click User Browser. Notice that the app has 3 logins from the same profile ID. Click the top profile ID in the list. This is the user's profile. Notice that it only has an anonymous identity type. Let's return to Unity and attach a universal identity to the user's profile. Run the app. From the Authentication type drop-down list, select Anonymous and then click Authenticate. From the drop-down list, select Identity. Enter a username and password. When that's done, click the Attach New Universal button. Stop the app and rerun it. From the Authentication type drop-down list, select Universal. Enter the username and password, then click Authenticate. From the drop-down list, select Player Stats. Notice that the counter statistics value is a 2. That's because this is the same profile as earlier. We can now access it using a universal identity. Stop the app and open your web browser. Click the user browser and then on the right, click the refresh button. Click the top profile ID in the list. Notice that the profile now contains a universal identity. The Unity Authentication example app demonstrates many more useful brainCloud features. Be sure to thoroughly check it out. Anonymous authentication is the next lesson in the Unity BootCamp.